This is Into Math 3rd grade, lesson 2.2, measure area by counting unit squares. The I can statement is I can describe area. I can measure and describe the area of a figure in square units. As a reminder, area is the measure of the number of unit squares needed to cover a surface. For example, if I am looking to find the area of the green figure, I can use unit squares to cover up this figure, and I find that there are 4 unit squares. So the area for the green figure would be 4 square units. Please gather your workbook and a pencil and turn to page 40. Feel free to pause the video and come back as needed. When you're ready, we'll begin with Build Understanding. Number 1, Miwa thinks she needs 6 1-inch square tiles to cover the rectangle below. So we're going to underline that she thinks she needs 6 1-inch squares. Greg thinks he needs 10 1-inch squares to cover the same rectangle. So we're going to underline what Greg thinks. Actually, I'm going to underline their names as well. Draw to show how the tiles might look. So here's our rectangle in gray, and then they give us a key here that is for 1 inch by 1 inch, so it is 1 square inch. And then they ask you to use your own materials, so maybe you have some 1-inch squares that you can play around with. Otherwise, you can always follow along with me, so it's your choice if you want to pause and come back, or if you want to just follow along. Our instructions say to draw to show how the tiles might look. So I'm going to take this 1 inch by 1 inch tile and I'm going to line it up in the rectangle, and then I'm going to keep adding more of these 1 inch by 1 inch squares to fill up the rectangle. When I use the square inches, I find that there are 8 square inches that cover the gray rectangle. So now I can answer questions A and B. Question A says, whose statement makes sense? And they are talking about up here where Miwa and Greg both were thinking about what they thought would work. And so Miwa thinks that it's going to take 6 1-inch squares and Greg thinks that it's going to take 10. Were either of them correct? No, they were not. So which statement makes sense? Well, neither makes sense. And then let's explain why. I can explain by saying that if I used 10 tiles, then some of the tiles would be on top of others, because I show right here 8 fit perfectly. So if I had 2 more, which would make 10, they'd have to go on top of each other, and that wouldn't work. If I had 6 tiles, well, then there would be space between the tiles and the whole rectangle would not be filled. So this is how I can explain why both of those statements do not make sense. Question B asks, how many 1-inch square tiles would you use to cover the rectangle? And how do you know? Well, that's an easy one for me because I already created the 8 tiles that were on the rectangle, and I know because I used the tiles to create it myself. I can explain my thinking by answering that there were 8 1-inch square tiles needed to cover the rectangle, and I covered the rectangle with 2 rows of 4 squares. Please turn the page to page 41. We will look at Step It Out, number 2. Les is measuring the area of this figure using unit squares. Each unit square is 1 square inch. What is the area of this figure? All right, so we're taking a look at the figure here in yellow, and we know that each of these squares, they tell us, is 1 square inch. An area is the number of unit squares needed to cover the surface. And it looks like they already started counting them by putting a 1 and a 2 here. So if you'd like to pause the video and keep counting and writing on the squares, you can do that and come back, or just follow along with me. So here's 3, 4, 5, and 6. So when we count the unit squares, we find that there are 6 unit squares. So we can write that in. Question B asks, what unit of measurement does Les use? And that information was given to us here. He is using, we can write square inch. And problem C, what is the area of the figure? And if you'd like to pause and try that on your own and come back, you can. But we have counted that there are 6 square inches. And it's really important, again, not just to write the number, but also to write that square inches next to it to answer the question. If you'd like to go back and rewatch any of this video, you can go ahead and do that and pause along the way as needed.